The transport ship landed with a loud thud on the metal platform. Commander HFY stepped out slowly, his legs shaking after the long journey home. 3 years of war had changed him. His once bright blue scales were now dull and covered with scars. The plasma burns on his chest still hurt when he moved too fast. Other soldiers walked past him without looking. They all had the same empty look in their eyes. The same look that said they had seen things that should not exist. Things that made no sense. Things that kept them awake at night. HFY walked through the busy streets of the capital city. Everything looked the same as when he left. The tall buildings reached toward the sky. The flying cars moved in perfect lines. Citizens of the Corvani Empire went about their daily business with pride and confidence. They believed they were the strongest species in the galaxy, but HFY knew better now. He entered the Imperial War College through the back entrance. The marble halls were filled with young cadets learning about military history and strategy. They studied the great victories of the past. They learned about conquered worlds and defeated enemies. But they would never learn about what happened in human space. Those files were locked away. HFY showed his identification card to the security guard. The old Corvani looked at the card and then at HFY's scarred face. He nodded and pressed a button. The heavy door slid open. The archive room was deep underground. No windows, no sounds from the outside world. Just rows and rows of data storage units containing the truth that the public would never see. HFY walked to terminal number 7 and entered his access code. The screen lit up with a warning message. Classification level Alpha. Authorized personnel only. Violation of security protocols punishable by death. HFY pressed continue. The first file appeared on the screen. Battle Report 2847A, the Battle of Kepler Station. Lieutenant Krixvan, commanding officer. HFY remembered Krixvan. A good soldier, brave, smart. He had returned from Kepler Station 3 months ago, but he was different. He would not talk about what happened there. He would not eat in the mess hall with the other officers. He stayed in his room and stared at the wall. Now HFY understood why. The report began with standard military language. Enemy force estimated at 300 humans. Corvani force numbered 15,000. The humans occupied a small mining station with basic defenses. Victory was expected within 6 hours, but the humans did not surrender. The siege lasted 3 weeks. HFY read about the first assault. The Corvani troops had surrounded the station and demanded surrender. The human response came over the radio in their strange language. When translated, it was just 2 words. Come on. The first wave of Corvani soldiers entered the station expecting to find frightened civilians. Instead, they found traps. The humans had turned every corridor into a killing ground. They used mining equipment as weapons. They made bombs from cleaning supplies. They had even removed the lights and fought in complete darkness while the Corvani stumbled around blind. But that was not the worst part. The humans fought differently than any species the Corvani had ever encountered. When a human soldier was wounded, he did not retreat or call for help. He would continue fighting until he died. Sometimes they would detonate explosives even when it meant killing themselves along with the enemy. HFY read about Sergeant Mexnar, who had cornered a wounded human female in a storage room. The human had lost her weapon and was bleeding from multiple wounds. Mexnar had ordered her to surrender. The human woman smiled at him and then pulled a pin from a grenade hidden in her clothing. The explosion killed them both. The report described similar incidents throughout the battle. Humans who fought with broken bones. Humans who used their own blood to blind enemy soldiers. Humans who sang songs while they died. But the most disturbing part was how the humans worked together. They seemed to know what each other was thinking without speaking. When one human fell, another would immediately take his place. They moved like a single organism with many parts. Lieutenant Krixvan wrote in his report that the humans appeared to feel no fear. They showed no mercy. They asked for no quarter. They fought as if death was not the end but just another weapon to be used against their enemies. By the end of the first week, the Corvani had lost 2,000 soldiers. The humans had lost maybe 50. But those 50 had died in ways that broke the minds of the Corvani who witnessed it. Zeftai scrolled down to read the final assault report. The Corvani had brought in heavy weapons and simply destroyed the station from the outside. When they entered the ruins, they found the bodies of the remaining humans. All of them were at their posts. All of them had died fighting. In the final paragraph, Lieutenant Crixvan wrote something that was not in standard military format. He wrote that the humans had left a message painted on the wall in their own blood. When translated, it read, "We are not the last. We are not the strongest. But we are still here." Zeftai closed the file and sat back in his chair. His hands were shaking. The Battle of Kepler Station was considered a Corvani victory. The humans had been defeated. The station was destroyed. But Zeftai remembered the conversation he had with Crixvan after the battle. "We did not win," Crixvan had said. "We just made them stop shooting at us." Zeftai opened the next file. Battle Report 2851-C, The Defense of New Terra Colony. Major Thelvor, Commanding Officer. Zeftai knew this battle well. He had been there. He had seen it with his own eyes. The colony was home to 50,000 humans, men, women, children, elderly. The Corvani fleet had surrounded the planet and demanded surrender. The human governor had requested 24 hours to consider the terms. 24 hours later, every human on the planet had vanished. Not dead, not captured, just gone. The Corvani search teams found empty houses with food still on the tables. They found schools with children's toys scattered on the floor. They found hospitals with medical equipment still running, but no humans. It took 2 weeks to figure out what had happened. The humans had dug tunnels. Miles and miles of tunnels connecting every building on the planet. They had been digging for months, maybe years, preparing for this day. 50,000 people had simply disappeared underground. The Corvani tried to follow them into the tunnels. The humans had been waiting. The tunnels were filled with traps, dead ends, and ambush points. Every few hundred meters, the Corvani would find evidence that the humans were still there. Footprints in the mud, warm ashes from cooking fires. Sometimes they would hear voices echoing through the darkness, but they could never find the source. After a month of searching, the Corvani gave up. They declared the planet conquered and left a garrison to maintain control. But the humans never stopped. Supply convoys would disappear. Patrols would vanish without a trace. Equipment would be sabotaged. The humans had turned their entire world into a weapon aimed at anyone who tried to take it from them. The garrison was withdrawn after 6 months. Officially, the planet was declared strategically unimportant. But Zeftai knew the truth. The Corvani had been defeated by ghosts. Zeftai looked at the long list of files still waiting to be read. Hundreds of battle reports. Thousands of pages of testimony from officers who had faced humans in combat. All of them classified. All of them hidden from the public. He thought about the propaganda broadcasts that played every day on Corvani news channels. Stories about the glorious war against the human rebels. Tales of easy victories and conquered worlds. The citizens of the Empire believed they were winning, but the soldiers knew different. Zeftai opened another file and began to read. Outside the archive room, the Empire continued to tell its lies. But down here in the darkness, surrounded by the truth, Zeftai finally understood what they had really been fighting. The humans were not just another species to be conquered. They were something else entirely, something that turned war itself into a weapon, something that made victory feel like defeat. And Zeftai was beginning to suspect that the war was far from over. Zeftai rubbed his tired eyes and looked at the time display. He had been reading for 6 hours straight. The archive room felt colder now, or maybe it was just the stories he was reading that made his blood feel like ice. He opened the next file. The classification level was even higher than the previous ones. Triple Alpha. Only the highest-ranking officers were supposed to see this. The file belonged to Captain Velthar, commander of the destroyer ship Razor Wind. Zeftai remembered. Velthar. Before the war, he was known for his calm nature and steady nerves. Other captains would joke that nothing could shake him. After he returned from the human territories, Velthar never spoke to anyone. He spent his days staring out the window of his quarters. The medical officers said his mind was broken, but they could not explain why. Now HFY was about to find out. The report began with standard information. The Razorwind was part of a fleet sent to capture New Denver Colony. The human settlement had been under siege for 2 months. No supply ships had reached them. No reinforcement fleets had come to help them. By all military calculations, the EI humans should have been dead weeks ago, but they were still fighting. Captain Velthar wrote that his sensors detected life signs in the colony. Thousands of humans were still alive inside the damaged buildings. This made no sense. The Corvani had cut off all food supplies. The colony's farming areas had been destroyed in the first week of the siege. No living thing should have been able to survive that long without food. The fleet commanders decided to send ground troops to finish the job. They expected to find weak and starving humans who would surrender immediately. Captain Velthar was ordered to provide support from orbit and document the final victory. The first shuttles landed outside the colony walls. The Corvani soldiers moved forward in perfect formation. Their equipment was the best in the galaxy. Their training was flawless. They outnumbered the remaining humans 10-1. But when they entered the colony, they found something that changed everything. The humans had been eating their dead. Captain Velthar's report described the scene in detail. The Corvani soldiers found rooms where human bodies were hanging from hooks like meat in a butcher shop. They found kitchens where human flesh was being cooked and prepared for meals. They found children, some as young as 8 or 9 years old, calmly cutting meat from adult corpses while humming songs. But this was not desperate cannibalism driven by starvation. This was organized, systematic. The humans had created rules about who would be eaten first. They had methods for preserving the meat. They had systems for making sure nothing was wasted. The Corvani soldiers expected to see horror and madness in the eyes of these humans. Instead, they saw calm determination. The humans were not ashamed of what they were doing. They spoke about it as if it was the most natural thing in the world. One human child, a girl about 10 years old, looked at a Corvani soldier and asked if he was hungry. She offered to share her meal with him. The meal was a piece of meat that had once been her own father. But the cannibalism was not the worst discovery. While the humans had been eating their dead to survive, they had also been preparing for war. They had turned the bones of the consumed bodies into weapons. Sharpened ribs became knives. Leg bones became clubs. Skulls were hollowed out and filled with explosive chemicals. They had been using the blood and organs to create biological weapons. Captain Velthar's report mentioned that the humans had developed diseases that only affected Corvani physiology. They had been growing bacteria in the rotting flesh and planning to spread it through the enemy forces. Every human in the colony, from the youngest child to the oldest adult, had been trained to kill. The siege had not weakened them. It had turned them into something more dangerous than they had been before. When the Corvani soldiers tried to arrest the humans, the real battle began. The humans did not fight like any species the Corvani had ever encountered. They used the layout of their own colony against the invaders. Every building had been turned into a fortress. Every room had become a trap. The humans knew exactly where every piece of cover was located, where every weak point in the walls could be found. But more disturbing was how they fought as individuals. A human soldier would pretend to be dead, lying motionless among real corpses. When a Corvani soldier came close to check, the human would spring up and attack with bone weapons. Sometimes they would bite their enemies with teeth that had been sharpened to points. Captain Velthar wrote about one incident that haunted him most. A Corvani squad had cornered a group of human children in a school building. The children were between 6 and 12 years old. The squad leader ordered them to surrender, expecting that even humans would not use children as soldiers. The children looked at each other and smiled. Then they began to sing. It was a children's song, something about stars and dreams. But while they sang, they moved closer to the Corvani soldiers. Their hands were behind their backs, hiding weapons made from sharpened metal and bone. The first child reached the nearest soldier and drove a blade made from a human femur bone into his chest. The other children followed, still singing their innocent song while they killed trained military personnel with handmade weapons. The squad leader managed to retreat and called for support. When reinforcements arrived, they found the children had disappeared. But the walls of the school were covered with drawings, pictures of Corvani soldiers being torn apart by small human hands. The drawings were done in crayon like any child's artwork, but they showed incredible detail about Corvani anatomy and exactly where to strike to cause the most damage. Captain Velthar's report described how the battle continued for 3 more days. The humans used every advantage they could find. They knew the colony better than the invaders. They had weapons that could not be detected by Corvani scanners. Most importantly, they fought without any concern for their own survival. A human would sacrifice himself to kill just one enemy soldier and consider it a fair trade. They would set fire to their own homes if it meant trapping Corvani troops inside. They would poison their own water supplies rather than let the enemy use them. By the end of the 3rd day, the Corvani had lost over half their ground forces. They called for evacuation and retreated to their ships. Captain Velthar was ordered to destroy the colony from orbit. As the Razor Wind powered up its weapons, the humans sent a message to the fleet. It was broadcast on all frequencies so every Corvani could hear it. The message was simple and spoken by a child's voice. "Thank you for the practice. We will be ready for you next time." Captain Velthar fired every weapon his ship had at the colony. The entire settlement was reduced to burning rubble. Nothing could have survived the bombardment. But somehow Zeftai knew the humans had found a way. The final part of the report was written in Captain Velthar's personal log, not in official military language. He wrote that he had been a soldier for 30 years. He had conquered 12 different species. He had seen warfare on dozens of worlds, but he had never encountered anything like the humans. He wrote that the humans did not seem to understand that war was supposed to end. For other species, war was about territory or resources or politics. When those goals were achieved or became impossible, the war would stop. But for humans, war was not about winning or losing. It was about survival. And as long as even one human remained alive, the war would continue. Captain Velthar's final entry was just one sentence written in shaking handwriting. "They are not like us. They are not like anyone. They are something else wearing the shape of people." Zeftai closed the file and sat in silence. He thought about the human refugees he had seen in the capital city. They looked so normal. They smiled and talked and went about their daily lives just like any other citizens of the empire. But now he wondered what they were really thinking behind those smiles. What they were really planning while they walked through Corvani streets and lived in Corvani homes. He opened another file, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely operate the controls. The next report was even worse. Zeftai's claws clicked against the keyboard as he opened the next section of files. These were different from the battle reports. The header showed they were intercepted communications from human military commanders, messages that had been captured by Corvani intelligence during the war. The first file contained radio transmissions from Colonel Jake Morrison, the human who had been in charge of defending the Titan mining complex. Zeftai remembered that battle. It had lasted 4 months and cost the Corvani Empire more ships than any other single engagement. The messages had been translated from human language into Corvani script. But even through the translation, Zeftai could sense something wrong about the way this human thought about war. The first message was sent to Lieutenant Amy Foster at Outpost 7. Colonel Morrison was giving her instructions for defending her position. "Amy, when they come for your position, do not try to hold it. Let them take the outer buildings. Make sure some of your people get captured alive. But before they surrender, have them swallow the poison capsules hidden in their gear. The poison will not kill them right away. It will take 6 hours to work. During those 6 hours, the enemy will interrogate them and put them with other prisoners. When the poison finally kills them, their bodies will release a gas that will kill everyone in the same room." Zeftai read the message 3 times to make sure he understood it correctly. The humans were planning to turn their own soldiers into delayed biological weapons. They would sacrifice their own people just to kill a few enemies 6 hours later. Tupauten. Next message was even worse. Foster, I need you to contaminate the water supply at Mining Station 12. Use the biological agent we developed from local bacteria. Make sure it spreads to the entire water system before the enemy arrives. When they take the station, they will use the water for drinking and cleaning. The sickness will start slowly, but after 2 weeks it will kill everything that drinks the water. This includes any civilian populations they might bring to work the mines. Colonel Morrison was ordering his soldier to poison water that would eventually be used by innocent people who had nothing to do with the war. But he spoke about it as if it was just another military tactic. HFY found more messages that revealed how the humans thought about warfare. They did not see any difference between soldiers and civilians. They did not believe in rules about what weapons could or could not be used. They did not think there were any limits to what was acceptable in war. One message contained instructions for psychological warfare that made HFY feel sick. Foster, we have been monitoring enemy communications. They talk about their families back home, their children, their mates, their parents. I want you to make recordings of Corvani voices screaming in pain. Use the prisoners we captured last week. Make them scream about their families being tortured. Then broadcast these recordings on all enemy frequencies during their night rest periods. Do this every night until they either go insane or retreat. But the most disturbing message was one where Colonel Morrison explained his philosophy of war to Captain Lisa Hayes, his second in command. Lisa, you asked me why we fight so differently than other species. The answer is simple. Every other species in this galaxy sees war as a temporary situation, something that happens between periods of peace. They have rules about war because they expect it to end eventually. But humans understand something they do not. There is no peace. There is only war that is happening now and war that is waiting to happen later. Every moment of peace is just preparation for the next fight. Every civilian is a future soldier. Every resource is a potential weapon. Every friendship is a military alliance waiting to be activated. This is why we do things that seem cruel or excessive to other species. We are not fighting just this war. We are fighting all the wars that will come after this one. Every enemy we kill now is an enemy that cannot teach their children to fight us later. Every weapon we develop is a tool our grandchildren will use to survive. HFY paused reading and looked around the empty archive room. The human's words made him think about all the human refugees now living in Corvani cities. Were they really refugees, or were they advanced scouts preparing for future wars? He continued reading Colonel Morrison's message. The other species think they can defeat us by destroying our military and then negotiate peace. They do not understand that every human is our military. The old woman selling food in the market knows how to make explosives from kitchen chemicals. The child playing in the park can strip and clean a rifle in under 2 minutes. The teacher at the school has memorized the locations of every strategic target in the city. We do not train soldiers and then send them to war. We are all soldiers who sometimes pretend to be other things. The next message contained Morrison's instructions for something called the long game. HFY had never heard this term before, but it made his scales crawl with fear. Lisa, the enemy thinks this war is about controlling territory in space. They think if they defeat our fleets and occupy our colonies, they will have won. They are wrong. This war is about survival, and survival is not about winning battles. It is about making sure your species exists tomorrow. Every human ship that gets destroyed should leave survivors who escape to different parts of the galaxy. Every human colony that falls should have refugees who scatter to other worlds. We are not trying to hold ground. We are trying to spread our people as widely as possible. In 50 years, there will be humans living in every major star system. In 100 years, human children will be born citizens of every species' homeworld. In 200 years, the galaxy will not remember that humans were once considered a separate species. This is how we win wars that last centuries instead of years. Not by conquering our enemies, but by becoming part of them. Another message revealed how the humans were already putting this plan into action. Foster, I am sending you a list of Corvani civilians who have shown sympathy for human refugees. These are potential allies, but more importantly, they are potential parents. I want you to identify young human women who can form relationships with these Corvani males. The children from these relationships will be raised as Corvani citizens, but they will carry human genetic material and human ways of thinking. The same process should be applied to human males and Corvani females. Every mixed child is a victory that will pay dividends for generations. HFY felt his stomach turn as he realized what the humans were doing. They were not just fighting a military war. They were fighting a genetic war. They were planning to literally breed themselves into other species. But the most terrifying message was the last one in the file. It was sent from Colonel Morrison to all human commanders in his sector. Brothers and sisters, I want you to understand what we are really fighting for. The other species in this galaxy see us as either cattle to be used or pests to be eliminated. They do not believe we deserve to exist as equals, so we will show them what happens when they try to eliminate us. We will become something they cannot eliminate. We will become part of everything they are and everything they will be. When this war ends, it will not matter who won the battles. What will matter is that human ideas, human genes, and human ways of thinking have spread to every corner of the galaxy. Our enemies will defeat us, but in doing so, they will make us part of themselves. This is not just war. This is evolution, and evolution always wins in the end. The message was signed with something that was not translated, just a series of symbols that looked like human writing. But somehow, HFY understood what it meant. It was not a name or a rank. It was a promise. HFY closed the communication files and sat back in his chair. His hands were shaking worse now. The humans were not just fighting to win territory or resources. They were fighting to transform the entire galaxy into something that would ensure their survival forever. And the worst part was that their plan was working. He thought about the human refugees in the city above. How many of them were already forming relationships with Corvani citizens? How many children had already been born from these unions? How many human ideas were already spreading through Corvani culture without anyone noticing? HFY realized that the war might be over, but the humans had not stopped fighting. They had just changed their methods. Now they were fighting with smiles instead of guns, with friendship instead of force, with love instead of hatred. But the goal was still the same: survival, and the humans would do anything to achieve it. HFY's eyes burned from staring at the screen for so many hours, but he could not stop reading. Each file revealed something worse than the last. Now he was looking at the medical archives. Reports from Corvani scientists who had studied captured human prisoners during the war. The first file belonged to Dr. Kethnal, the Empire's leading expert on alien biology. Before the war, Dr. Kethnal had studied dozens of different species. He understood how their bodies worked, how their minds functioned, what made them strong or weak. But the humans had puzzled him. Dr. Kethnal's report began with basic observations. Humans were smaller than most Corvani. They had no natural armor like scales or thick skin. They had no claws or fangs. Their bones were weak. Their muscles were not particularly strong. By every measure that mattered for survival, humans should have been easy to defeat. But they were not. The doctor had performed medical examinations on 12 human prisoners. What he found inside their bodies explained why they fought so differently than other species. The human body produced chemicals that turned them into better fighters when they were in danger. Dr. Kethnal called these combat drugs, but they were natural. Every human was born with the ability to make these chemicals inside their own body. When a human was threatened, their body would flood with something called adrenaline. This chemical made them faster and stronger. It made them ignore pain. It made them think more clearly in dangerous situations. Other species had similar chemicals, but not like humans. Human bodies produced much more of these chemicals and for much longer periods. Dr. Kethnal tested this by putting the human prisoners in stressful situations. When threatened, a human's strength could increase by 50%. Their reaction time became twice as fast. They could continue fighting even with serious injuries that would disable other species. But the adrenaline was just the beginning. Human bodies also produced chemicals called endorphins when they were hurt. These chemicals blocked pain and created feelings of calm or even happiness. Dr. Kethenall watched human prisoners smile while having medical procedures that should have caused terrible pain. One human prisoner, a female named Kate Williams, had been shot in the leg during her capture. The wound was serious and needed immediate treatment. But during the medical procedure to fix her leg, she remained calm and even made jokes with the medical staff. Dr. Kethenall wrote that she seemed to be enjoying the experience of being operated on without pain medication. Even more disturbing was what happened to human brains during combat. Dr. Kethenall used scanning equipment to watch the brains of human prisoners while they were shown pictures of violence and warfare. Normal species showed fear and stress when looking at images of death and destruction. Their brains tried to avoid thinking about such things. But human brains were different. When humans saw images of violence, parts of their brain became more active, not less. They became more alert and focused instead of afraid. Dr. Kethenall discovered that extended combat actually changed human brains permanently. The more fighting a human experienced, the better their brain became at processing violence and making quick decisions under pressure. War did not damage humans psychologically the way it damaged other species. War made them more efficient. But the most shocking discovery was about human social behavior. Dr. Kethenall had noticed that human prisoners worked together in ways that seemed impossible. They could coordinate complex plans without speaking. They seemed to know what other humans were thinking just by looking at them. Through careful study, he realized that humans had evolved as pack hunters. Their ancestors had hunted together, in groups, and this had shaped how their brains worked. Humans could read the emotions and intentions of other humans with incredible accuracy. They could also read the emotions of other species, even ones they had never encountered before. This made humans naturally gifted at psychological warfare. They could tell when an enemy was afraid, angry, or confused just by observing small changes in body language or voice tone. They used this ability to manipulate their enemies' emotions during combat. Dr. Kethenall wrote about an experiment where he put a human prisoner in a room with Corvani guards. Within 1 hour, the human had identified which guards were nervous, which ones were angry, and which ones might be sympathetic to prisoners. The human then used different techniques to manipulate each guard's emotions. The nervous guard was made to feel more confident by the human offering praise and respect. The angry guard was made to feel calmer by the human appearing submissive and apologetic. The sympathetic guard was made to feel protective by the human acting scared and helpless. By the end of the day, all 3 guards were treating the human prisoner as a friend rather than an enemy. They brought extra food, shared personal stories, and even asked the human for advice about their problems. Dr. Kethenall realized that humans could weaponize social relationships. They could make enemies into allies, turn allies against each other, and create loyalty or hatred in other species almost at will. But the most terrifying part of the report dealt with human reproduction and development. Humans matured much faster than other intelligent species. A human could be trained for combat by age 16 and could produce offspring by age 18. Most other species needed 30 or 40 years to reach similar levels of development. This meant that humans could replace their population much faster after suffering losses in war. But Dr. Kethenall discovered something even worse. Human children did not need to be taught how to fight. They seemed to learn it naturally. Human children as young as 5 years old could understand complex strategies and tactics. They could learn to use weapons with minimal training. They could be taught to lie, spy, and manipulate adults from other species with frightening effectiveness. Dr. Kethenall wrote that human children were not innocent the way children from other species were. They were simply small humans with all the same capabilities as adults, just waiting to grow larger and stronger. The doctor had interviewed several human children who were captured with their parents. These children, between ages 6 and 12, could describe in detail how to kill various alien species. They knew the weak points in Corvani anatomy. They understood how to make weapons from common household items. They could explain psychological techniques for breaking down enemy morale. When asked where they learned these things, the children said they learned from games and songs and stories their parents told them. What humans called entertainment for children was actually military training disguised as play. But the final section of Dr. Kethenall's report was the most disturbing of all. It dealt with something he called genetic memory. Through studying human DNA, Dr. Kethnal discovered that humans carried genetic information from their ancestors that affected their behavior. Millions of years of survival on a dangerous planet had programmed certain responses into human genetics. Humans were born knowing how to recognize threats, how to form alliances, how to compete for resources, and how to survive in hostile environments. They did not need to learn these things through experience. The knowledge was already inside them from birth. This explained why humans could adapt so quickly to new situations. When faced with an unknown enemy or environment, their genetic programming would activate and guide them toward survival strategies that had worked for their ancestors. Dr. Kethnal calculated that if humans were allowed to spread throughout the galaxy without restriction, they would dominate every environment they entered. Not through conquest, but through adaptation. They would become the most successful species in any ecosystem, simply because they were genetically programmed to survive and reproduce more effectively than their competitors. The report's conclusion was written in red text, marked as the highest possible priority. Recommendation: immediate termination of all contact with human species, complete quarantine of all human territories. Humans represent an existential threat to all other intelligent life in the galaxy. They are not merely another species competing for resources. They are an invasive form of life that will eventually replace all other forms if allowed to spread. This recommendation is not based on military concerns or political considerations. It is based on biological reality. Humans are evolutionarily designed to be the dominant species wherever they exist. Coexistence is not possible in the long term. HFY sat back in his chair and stared at the screen. Dr. Kethnal's report was 3 years old. It had been classified and hidden away just like all the other evidence about what humans really were. But now there were thousands of humans living freely in Corvani space. They were having children with Corvani citizens. They were teaching in Corvani schools. They were working in Corvani businesses. And if Dr. Kethnal was right, this was not an accident. This was exactly what the humans had planned from the beginning. HFY opened the final file in the archive. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely control the keyboard. But he had to know the complete truth, no matter how terrible it might be. HFY's claws trembled as he opened the final file. This one was different from all the others. The classification level was beyond anything he had ever seen before. The access log showed that only 5 individuals in the entire Corvani Empire had ever read this document. The file belonged to Supreme Admiral Thekros, the highest military commander in the Empire, the one who had ordered the withdrawal from human space, the one who had declared the war over. But now HFY was about to learn the real reason why. The document began with a simple statement that made HFY's blood turn cold. The humans have been lying to us from the very beginning. Everything we thought we knew about this war was false. Everything we believed about human capabilities was deliberately planted misinformation. The humans have been playing a game that we did not even know existed. Admiral Thekros wrote that after 2 years of war, Corvani intelligence had finally broken the encryption on high-level human military communications. What they found changed everything. The humans had never intended to win the war through military victory. From the very first battle, they had been following a plan called the long game. Every defeat, every retreat, every desperate last stand had been carefully calculated to achieve a different goal. The humans were studying their enemies. Every battle was a test. The humans would try different tactics and weapons to see how the Corvani would respond. They would sacrifice entire colonies just to learn how Corvani commanders made decisions under pressure. They would let themselves be captured to study Corvani interrogation techniques and prison systems. But the most shocking discovery was that many of the human prisoners had been volunteers. They had deliberately allowed themselves to be captured, while carrying false information designed to mislead Corvani intelligence officers. Admiral Thekros wrote about intercepted communications between human commanders discussing their intelligence assets in Corvani prison camps. These were not real prisoners. They were human spies who had been surgically altered to appear wounded and given fake memories through advanced psychological conditioning. These fake prisoners had been feeding the Corvani false information about human military capabilities, human population numbers, and human strategic plans. Everything the Corvani thought they knew about their enemy had been carefully crafted lies. The real human military was much larger than the Corvani had believed. Their technology was more advanced. Their strategic planning was centuries ahead of anything the Corvani had imagined possible. But the worst revelation was still to come. Admiral Thekros had discovered that the war itself was just a cover for something much more important. While the Corvani were focused on military battles, the humans had been implementing a plan to infiltrate every major civilization in the galaxy. Human refugees from the war zones were not randomly fleeing to safety. They were being systematically placed in specific locations throughout Corvani space and the territories of other alien species. Each refugee had been carefully selected and trained for their assigned role. Some humans were sent to live in major cities where they would integrate into local society and have children with alien citizens. Others were placed in positions where they could influence education, spreading human ideas and values to alien children. Still others were positioned to eventually gain access to government, military, or scientific institutions. The admiral wrote that human refugee ships often carried hidden compartments filled with genetic samples, cultural records, and technological information. The humans were not just spreading their people throughout the galaxy, they were spreading their entire civilization. Admiral Thekros had traced the movement of human refugees over the 3 years of war. The pattern was not random. Every refugee group had been sent to locations that would maximize their long-term influence on alien societies. They were targeting planets with young populations that would be most susceptible to new ideas. They were focusing on systems with high birth rates where human genetic material would spread most quickly through the population. But the most terrifying part of the plan was how the humans viewed time. Most species planned for the immediate future. Military campaigns were measured in months or years. Political strategies covered decades at most. Economic plans rarely extended beyond a single generation, but the humans were planning for centuries. Admiral Thekros had found human documents discussing population projections for the year 2500. Strategic plans that assumed current human children would have great-great-grandchildren fighting wars that had not yet begun. Cultural integration programs designed to slowly transform alien civilizations over hundreds of years. The humans understood that they could not conquer the galaxy through force, but they could become the galaxy through patience and planning. In 50 years, there would be humans living on every major world. In 100 years, human genetic material would be part of most alien bloodlines. In 200 years, the distinction between human and alien cultures would disappear entirely. The humans were not trying to destroy other species. They were trying to absorb them. Admiral Thekros wrote that he had shared this information with the leaders of 12 other alien civilizations. All of them had found similar patterns in their own territories. Human refugees were spreading throughout the galaxy like seeds carried by the wind. And everywhere they landed, they began to grow. But the most chilling discovery was that the humans probably did not even realize they were doing it. The admiral had studied human psychology reports and concluded that this behavior was not the result of conscious planning by human leaders. It was instinctive. Humans had evolved on a planet where survival required constant expansion into new territories. When faced with any challenge, their natural response was to spread out and adapt, rather than fight and die. The war had not been a human military campaign. It had been a human survival response. When threatened with extinction, the humans had automatically activated genetic programming that had been shaped by millions of years of evolution. They scattered like living seeds, carrying everything necessary to rebuild their civilization wherever they landed. Admiral Thekros wrote that trying to fight this process would be like trying to fight evolution itself. The humans were not choosing to expand throughout the galaxy. They were compelled to do it by biological imperatives that were stronger than conscious thought. The final section of the Admiral's report contained his recommendations to the Emperor. Your Majesty, we face a choice that will determine the future of our species. We can continue fighting the humans, knowing that every battle will only spread them further throughout our territory. or we can accept that they are going to become part of our civilization whether we want them to or not. If we choose to fight, we will lose everything that makes us Corvani. Our culture will be destroyed in endless warfare. Our people will be consumed by hatred and fear. Our children will grow up knowing only violence and death. If we choose to accept human integration, we may be able to preserve some of our identity within the larger civilization that emerges. Our language, our art, our traditions could survive as part of something larger rather than disappearing entirely. I recommend immediate cessation of all military action against human targets. I recommend opening formal diplomatic relations with human leadership. I recommend beginning controlled integration programs that allow us to maintain some influence over how this process unfolds. The humans are going to win this war not because they are stronger or smarter than us, but because they represent the next stage of galactic evolution. We can either adapt to this reality or be replaced by it. The document ended with Admiral Thekross's personal seal and a final note written in his own handwriting. May the gods forgive us for what we have allowed to begin. Zeftai closed the file and sat in complete silence. The archive room felt like a tomb now. All around him were the records of a war that had never really been a war at all. It had been something much worse. It had been the beginning of the end of everything the galaxy had been before. Zeftai thought about his journey home from the war, the human refugees he had seen in the spaceport, the human families walking through Corvani streets, the human children playing with Corvani youngsters in the parks. They all looked so normal, so peaceful, so harmless. But now he understood that they were something else entirely. They were the future, and the future was human, whether anyone else wanted it to be or not. Zeftai turned off the computer terminal and walked toward the exit. Above him, in the city streets, the quiet conquest of the galaxy continued. And there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The humans had already won. They had won before the war even began. They had won simply by being human.